Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Greatest Games podcast on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. With me is Jonathan Wilson, and with us today is Matthew Watson-Broughton, author of The Amazing Journey, How Newcastle United Conquered Europe. Matthew's also worked for UEFA, the LOCOG, FINA, and is currently the English website editor for the Hungarian Football Federation. Also, in his spare time, Matthew runs one of Hungary's largest adult-level amateur football clubs. Matthew, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to coming on the pod today.
Thank you very much.
Matthew, you were born in Newcastle, but you've lived in Hungary on and off for nearly sort of 20 years. So I'm guessing that has influenced your choice, because today we go back to the 1969 Intercities Fairs Cup second leg that finished Újpesti Dózsa 2, Newcastle United 3, with Newcastle winning 6-2 on aggregate. Why have you chosen this game?
This game is I think it's not unrealistic to call it a seminal moment in Newcastle United's history, my hometown club, obviously. And growing up, I read a lot about, my club and the history and the major figures, but there was never a book out there that really summed it up and got to the heart of the detail. So 2 years ago, I decided, with my background in Hungarian football as well, to correct that situation, and I wrote this this book, and therefore it was obvious that I would choose this game to talk about. It's essentially, my expert area, if I'm an expert in anything at all in life.
Excellent. Well, Jonathan, perhaps we should sort of remind or inform people what the Intercities Fairs Cup, or simply the Fairs Cup, was, because it's not been around since 1971.
Yeah, so it is taken on by UEFA and becomes the UEFA Cup, which obviously becomes the Europa League. At this point, it is still theoretically as much about trade fairs as it is about football. So there's a limit of one club per city. So in its very earliest incarnations, you had, for instance, a London 11, which is players drawn from a range of London clubs representing London. By this point, it's decided a club should represent each city. So Newcastle only qualify. I'm not just saying this because I'm a Sunderland fan, although I would underline it because I'm a Sunderland fan. Newcastle only qualify for this because they finished 10th in the league the previous season. Manchester City have qualified for the European Cup as champions. Manchester United have qualified for the European Cup as European champions. West Brom have qualified for the Cup Winners' Cup as FA Cup winners. And you then have Liverpool and Chelsea have taken 2 of the other slots for the Fairs Cup. And Everton couldn't be in it because Liverpool are in it. And Arsenal and Tottenham couldn't be in it because Chelsea are in it. And so, as a last resort, they look all the way down the table. What have we? 10th? Newcastle United, I suppose we can let them in.
Yeah. That's certainly a Sunderland way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think Leeds fans would like to hear their club in there as well. They were the third of the 4 sides involved, and Jonathan's absolutely right. In fact, up until the draw, it wasn't even known if Newcastle United would be in the competition. To add to Jonathan's I don't want to say bitterness, but
hang on, so just remind me, you haven't won a trophy since.
There we go. Yeah.
No, we haven't. Yes. We can't claim to have won the Papa John's,
yeah,
whatever it is. Since then, so to add to that, the fairs, Newcastle only got into it because it expanded from 48 teams at the start of that season to 64, and it wasn't known that would actually happen until the day of the actual first round draw. The Fairs Cup committee hadn't ratified it. The only way it would be found out is when the draw would be announced. Newcastle didn't even send a delegation to Copenhagen where the draw was made. The first anybody knew about it was when a telegram arrived on Tyneside saying that Newcastle United had been drawn against, well, undoubtedly one of the best European clubs at that time.
Yeah, so Newcastle United, they finished 10th in the around this time, of course, in the top flight. Yeah, I mean, the interesting place the world was in sort of 1968, 1969. I mean, Neil Armstrong and his gang were walking on the moon. You know, music and youth culture and all the rest of it was in full flow. What was how was Newcastle around this time? I mean, I suppose we sort of think of the swinging 60s, and you think of sort of Carnaby Street in London and all that sort of stereotype and whatnot. What was going on in Newcastle? What were the sort of the cultural points and so on?
I think it's not a surprise to understand or realize that maybe Newcastle in the northeast was a little bit behind the times in terms of the swinging 60s, and earlier in the 60s that would have overtaken London. It was just becoming that way in Newcastle as well, but it was certainly an exciting time. The first nightclub in the northeast was the Club Fandango in Hexham, of all places.
Hexham, Jesus
Hexham,
Christ.
opened by I'm trying to remember exactly who it was owned by, but the striker for Newcastle, one of the strikers for Newcastle, Brian Pop Robson, was from Hexham, and I believe it was either his parents or his wife's parents who opened this club, and these things were springing up in Newcastle as well. All of these places had the kind of the same DNA. It was a working class city. There was exciting things going on, but also these kind of cities were hanging on to an industrial past, and change wasn't far away, and not necessarily in a good way, because they were so reliant on those industries, and that fed into the situation in football and with communities that still people's own only escape, let's say, men of a certain age's only leisure pursuit would be come out of the mines, and Saturday afternoon was go to the football.
Sorry, can I just... Brian Pop Robson was from Sunderland. He might have lived in Hexham. He was born in Sunderland. He went on to play 3 times for Sunderland.
Yeah.
And most famously of all, at the age of 38, scored the second goal in the 2-0 win at Leicester on the final day of 83-4 to keep Sunderland up. So let's not be traducing a hero like Pop Robson by saying he's from Hexham.
Well, I stand corrected. He married a girl from Hexham, so he does. So that's why I can't.
So he's married up, is what you're saying.
I think we claim him as our hero. Certainly not a Sunderland one, but then again, won't be the only thing we ever disagree on, I suppose.
He's an ecumenical hero, shall we say?
He's an English hero. But Jonathan, on a previous pod, we spoke about Newcastle United and the city of Newcastle around in the 50s. Last time they won the FA Cup was 1955, which was their previous major trophy win before this one. And in that podcast, which painted quite a different picture of Newcastle in terms of sort of industry and so on. There was a lot of change from that 55 FA Cup win to this Fairs Cup win in 1969, as Matthew was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are starting to see the first cracks in the big industries, and I think that the sort of anxiety is beginning to creep in. Obviously, it gets much much over the 70s and particularly the early 80s. But yeah, I think there's a you've also you got sort of Gateshead booms in this time. You have it looks like a concrete monstrosity now, but at the time it was seen as being quite modern and quite innovative. So yeah, it's the beginning of that period of flux. And while I joke about Newcastle, this is actually a really good team. If you look through it, you got Frank Clark, who goes on to win a European Cup. You've got 2 Scotland internationals in Jim Scott and Jackie Sinclair. You got Wyn Davis, who would go on to play for Manchester City and Manchester United, a great Wales international. And slightly surprisingly, I think to many people, you've got a Dane, a sort of Danish playmaker, who just seems to play 1-2s all the time. Like, if you look at the clips, constant 1-2s with Benny Arentoft at the middle of it. And I can't quite work. I mean, maybe you know this, Matthew, what his story is. And I know Newcastle signed him from Greenock Morton, but why? How did he pitch up at Greenock Morton?
He was part of the Danish invasion or Scandinavian invasion into Scotland in the mid to late 60s. The Greenock Morton chairman was kind of a visionary. He realized that these players from Denmark were just amateurs over there, but were very good. And he started bringing them in, basically. I went twice to Denmark to interview Benny. And it was very interesting. The whole point of Hal Stewart was the Greenock Morton chairman. His vision was, come over here, play for me for a season or two, and then I'll get you a big move to either the old firm or to England, and you can earn plenty of money there. And that suited a Danish amateur footballer fine. So that's what they did. Several ended up at Rangers. There were more going down to England as well. Benny had trials at Tottenham before coming to Newcastle, and was then delighted to beat Spurs 1-0 in his first game, and be able to gloat in that. He signed midway through that season in 68-9. And he was a workhorse, really. He got through an enormous amount of work in that midfield, and it shocked a lot of people later on when he would score one of the goals of the competition. Great guy, and fitted exactly into that team. Jonathan, you're right about what you say about the makeup of Newcastle. It was by no means a bad team, and it had grown since. So Joe Harvey, the manager, had taken over. One of the main figures of those 50s Cup wins. He had retired in about 55. He'd been a coach for the 55 FA Cup winning team, and then he'd gone out to start his managerial education, and was called back to Newcastle in 1962 by Chairman Stan Seymour. To try and get the club out of a hole. They'd been relegated from Division 1, and they were down on their luck, really. And Joe Harvey turned it around. He built a promotion-winning team in 64-5, which came up with Northampton Town. Bizarrely, I think that just says it all about the era that we're talking about. And avoided relegation in sort of 65, 66 and 66, 67, when Newcastle were kind of struggling. He sold a crowd favourite, Alan Suddick, to Blackpool in order to finance a refurbishment of the team, and brought in people like John McNamee, who is a famous player in the 60s because he was Newcastle's version of Chopper Harris or Billy Bremner, or Norman Hunter or Dave Mackay. He was Newcastle's hard man, and that meant that Newcastle had kind of a more of a substance to them that could stay in Division 1. And in 67-8 they were able to have a very successful season. Actually, they were 5th at Christmas and dropped a little bit later to 10th because of injuries, but it meant they went into this Fairs Cup campaign with players who were, firstly, there was some real talent there, as Jonathan's alluded to. Secondly, younger players who were coming through who had no fear. And thirdly, players who were not afraid to roll up their sleeves and really get stuck in. And that, in the 60s and probably up until the 90s, you would say, was a real asset for a British side in Europe.
And tell us a bit about Újpest. What sort of status did they have within Hungarian football at the time?
Újpest were formerly a very good side, if not a great side at times in their history. I think.
Well, I mean, they'd won the Mitropa Cup, hadn't they, in the 30s? So they were. Yeah. I mean, they weren't at the level of Ferencváros or MTK, but they're clearly the third, I'd say, team of that era, aren't they?
Yeah, they were the third in the 30s. Yeah, the 20s and 30s were dominated by Ferencváros and MTK with Újpest there as well. But they'd won titles. They'd after the war, they'd taken they weren't prioritized by the Hungarian regime, which shaped football at that time. The communist regime placed all their emphasis and focus on Honvéd and MTK to nurture a world-class side, the Magical Magyars. But Újpest was still generating players because it's a big part of Budapest. In fact, it was originally just a suburb or on its own, a town on its own. So they had a good catchment area. They had a good history. Béla Gutmann, obviously a European Cup winning coach with Benfica, had won the league already, the Hungarian league with Újpest. And they won the title in 1960 in Hungary. So they were an eminent team, but they'd suffered in the 60s, and they weren't one of the top clubs early on in that decade. A lot changed after 1964-65. MTK were on the way down. They didn't really feature much after reaching the Cup Winners' Cup final in 64. The three main teams became Ferencváros, obviously with Florian Albert at their head, Vasas, who won the title several times in the mid-60s, and had the likes of Farkas, who scored that great goal in the 66 World Cup, and Mesai at the back. And then Újpest. And Újpest had this generation that was really looking very exciting, a very attacking team. But they needed a coach who could shape them, who could balance them, who could unleash that potential. And that coach was Lajos Baróti, who is a famous name in Hungarian football, former Hungarian international, very experienced coach, was the Hungary coach the 58 World Cup when it was a committee kind of style of selection. He took on the job on his own after that, 62, 66, managed very talented and unlucky Hungarian national sides, I would say. And after 66, he took over at Újpest. And that's when younger players like Ferenc Benne, who had starred at that summer's World Cup, Antal Dunai, who became the Silver Boot winner in 1968, European Silver Boot behind Eusebio, and János Gurúcs, who was originally an inside right, but was pulled back into midfield by Baróti. That was when they could really flourish, and there was enough talent around them to really wrest control of Hungarian football. And 68-9 was probably the best vintage of that. Some Újpest fans would argue that when they got to the European Cup semi-final 5 years later and played Bayern, that was a great side too, with lots of the same faces. But in 68-69, they still had János Gurúcs at the top of his powers. He had to retire a couple of years later with a bad injury. And they had everything in the right place. They won the double in 68-69, and they knocked out some great teams on the way as well. Leeds United being a foremost example. Legia Warsaw as well, who at that time were a very strong side and reached the European Cup semi-finals the following year. So once you do get to the final of the Fairs Cup, there is only one favourite in that tie, and it wasn't Newcastle United.
All right, well, let's have a quick break, chaps, and then we'll talk about the Fairs Cup final of 1969 itself. See you in a moment, everybody. Welcome back to the greatest games on the Blizzard. So yes, it was as your book title suggests, Matthew, how Newcastle conquered Europe, the amazing journey. Well, the amazing journey got off to a good start against Feyenoord Rotterdam, which they dispatched 4-2 in aggregate, but they won 4-0 at home in the first leg. So it was a great start for Newcastle United. Yeah, what was the expectation going into this tournament? Because as Jonathan reminded us at the top of the show, they were the 10th best side in England at the time.
Yeah, as I've alluded to, they were quite unlucky to only finish 10th that season due to injuries, but certainly they weren't a powerhouse of English football in the 60s by any stretch of the imagination. And we know that they got into it, let's say, through the back door, for want of a better phrase. The expectations weren't high. Bob Moncur, who we haven't mentioned yet, but was, the heart and soul of this team, I think, in terms of guidance and leadership at the back, a great reader of the game, captain of the club, and went on soon to captain Scotland. He said when he found out that they were in Europe, which followed the draw, he couldn't believe it for a start. He thought they were kidding with him, and after that, he said, it's nice. It's a nice bonus to go abroad once, but we'll not stay in it very long. And that was the thought. But
I mean, he didn't even get to go abroad, did he? To start with, they left him out of the away game final to save money.
That's not true. I am going to bite. Yes, that's
Okay.
not true. That's not true. So he unfortunately sustained a knee ligament injury in pre-season away at I think it was Hibernian, and he wasn't able to play in the first leg in Rotterdam. I think the saving money thing probably more of a kind of it probably was money based in terms of they didn't take their captain on the journey, although at the time he wasn't the club captain. It was Jim Eiley who left the club a couple of months later to go and be player manager at Peterborough. He was the captain of Newcastle during the 60s and was sort of reaching the age of moving on. So Bob went with the fans to Rotterdam, and
because there's a whip round to pay for him or something. Is that true?
Yeah, I think the supporters club said you're coming with us, and he did, and he was watching with the crowd as they battled to stay in the competition at that point, because they had won 4-0 at home, but that was very much a case of the perfect storm of a situation. Feyenoord, and I spoke with players from every one of Newcastle's opponents throughout this campaign, and the Dutch players I spoke to told me how they had absolutely no clue, about Newcastle United, about their team. They thought they were turning up for a pre-season friendly. Basically, they would cruise through, and because they had such great players.
Well, we should say this is such a good side. They do go on to win the European Cup the following year. So Feyenoord are a really, really good team.
They are. They did the Dutch double in 68, 69, beating Cruyff's Ajax to the League and Cup. So you're absolutely right. But they took it lightly, and they also had a player at right back, Frans van der Heijden, a fantastic guy to speak to about the game and an interview. But he was more of a kind of a ball playing fullback. In fact, he was more of a midfielder, and he was only at Feyenoord there for one season. He played in Newcastle against a young left winger called Jeff Allen, who tore him apart. I mean, there's just no other way to say it, with a raucous Geordie crowd on a balmy northeast night, with the whiff of the brewery enveloping St James's Park, the nearby brewery. It was a fantastic occasion for everyone who was there, and right from the very start, Newcastle got right on top of their opponents, who were complacent, and scored 4 goals, pretty comprehensively. Certainly early on, there was no stopping Allen, who is one of the great losses in Newcastle United's history. He tore his cruciate ligament about a month later and was never made it back. But that was his golden moment. And so going to Rotterdam 4-0 up, but Newcastle were 2-0 down after about an hour, and they were hanging on in there. This was when the likes of Willem van Hanegem and the rest of that great team of Feyenoord really got going, but they couldn't pull it back.
They
So
didn't
Newcastle
manage it though, Matthew.
They didn't manage it, and then Newcastle's campaign really started, and they knew from the very start that do your work at home, get the job mostly done, and then you hang on in when you're away.
Mind you, you say that though, but I mean the second, and I take the point because their home form was pretty good that season. But in the second round, Jonathan, they beat Sporting 2 on an aggregate, but that involved winning 1-0 away from home in the second leg.
Yeah, when the pitch was totally unplayable because it was underwater. I mean, they got the. I think that if you look at the teams in Newcastle beat to get to the final, they had a much harder run to get there. Yeah. I mean, Újpest, they end up winning their semi-final 8-1 on aggregate against Göztepe, who had put Hamburg out. I mean, they weren't jokers, but
sure.
I'd certainly rather have Újpest run than Newcastle's. But yeah, they get the break. That's the pitch in Sporting it helps them out. But then Zaragoza, who'd had a series of great games against Leeds, and the game when Jack Charlton was sent off for attacking the goalkeeper when the police had to get involved, and then the bizarre sort of Easter blizzard against Vitoria de Setúbal, and it hadn't snowed in Setúbal for 25 years, so their players are sort of like looking at this sort of cold white stuff coming from the sky, going, oh, what's that? And then the Rangers semi-final seems like one of the most brutal, kind of chaotic games imaginable.
But it ended. But that Matthew, Newcastle, they drew the first leg 0-0 at home and then won 2-0 away. So some impressive away results.
I think, I mean,
to the final.
It's probably worth just sort of kind of clearing those up. So they drew away at Lisbon, 1-1. And won at home with a cracking one of the best goals in Newcastle's history. Any fan will say that, from Pop Robson, and so a volley, and then they went away to their home form was superb. They won 6 out of 6. Their away form, it was tougher. So with Rangers, for example, they drew 0-0 away from home. And got out of there with a goalless draw thanks to Willie McFall, who saved a penalty.
Well, he's a player we haven't really mentioned yet, of the sort of legendary players. That if Pat Jennings hadn't existed, Willie McFall would be a legend. He was a great goalkeeper who, as so often happens in these cases, comes along as a Northern Irish keeper at a time when they have their greatest keeper of all time by a million miles.
Yeah, that was true, and it was also true for Newcastle's fullback David Craig, who was also Northern Irish and would have been a legend as well had Pat Rice not been ahead of him in the Northern Ireland lineup. So again, just backing up that they had extremely capable players at the top level, but Europe was completely different, and Newcastle did not have that experience, but they had talent, and they had naivety, and they had a great crowd behind them, 50,000-60,000 fans at each game, and that made the difference. So Zaragoza as well, they lost away from home 3-2 on New Year's Day 1969, but got through on away goals into the quarterfinal. You mentioned that snow blizzard. During my research, I found a recording of the highlights of the first half of the game in Newcastle with this blizzard, and speaking to the Setúbal players, they'd never seen anything like it. They were jumping around and hooping outside the hotel the day before, playing in the snow, but when they were lined up in the tunnel before the game, they were shadows of themselves. They were stood there huddling to try and keep warm. The substitutes started a fire in the dressing room in St James's Park to try and keep warm. I mean, setting fire to medical supplies in the first aid bag. I mean, this is just ridiculous. But to Newcastle, for all me saying they have good players and they had the crowd and everything, they had moments of luck and fortune right from the start of actually even getting into the competition, that make you think their name was just meant to be on this trophy. And this carried all the way through, not just the weather, not just questionable tactics from opponents or attitudes from opponents, but also the penalty saves on the pitch, and we'll get to the final. Exactly the same examples or very similar examples there as well.
Yeah, did the Rangers fans try and get the second leg in Glasgow abandoned? Is that right? There was a bit of crowd trouble, to say the least.
Yeah, so the first leg was away in Glasgow. Newcastle escape with a 0-0 draw. They have it's I know it was it Galatasaray who coined the fans coined the phrase "Welcome to Hell." Going to Ibrox in 1969 was a terrifying prospect for an away group. The reserves went up there on the bus to watch it and had their windows caved in by fans outside, and that was so that away leg in Glasgow was
quite tasty.
Tasty. John McNamee had the game of his life on one leg. Wasn't even meant to be in the team, but got called up because of an illness to Ollie Burton, who had a kind of like an epileptic fit before the game, and McNamee comes in and takes care of Colin Steen to make a real difference. And then they get back to St. James's Park, and Rangers, they take over the town. There are marching bands going through the big market outside the Evening Chronicle offices during the day. Rangers fans are taking over any sort of pubs that are open, just invading. Sometimes paying for the drinks, sometimes not.
But did they try and get the match abandoned? Was that, I read that somewhere, or is that's not quite right?
No, it's right. Newcastle scored the first goal of that game in midway through the second half, and that was the cue for the 20,000 or so fans who'd got in, some with tickets, some without, to invade the pitch. And I found a lot of photographs of this during my research, and it's staggering just to see how many there were. The players got taken off the pitch, and we're in the dressing rooms, and the Rangers chairman came in and said to the Newcastle dressing room, said, "I'm just really sorry. It's obviously that this is your game now, and I think Rangers are a huge club. I think their fans went down to Newcastle thinking we're going to win. And when you have the cocktail of overconfidence and extreme amounts of alcohol, it's no surprise that something like that happened.
And yet, just 5 short years later, in an FA Cup tie against Nottingham Forest, the boot would very much be on the other foot. And that time, with Newcastle losing, the game was abandoned, and they came back, and Newcastle won that game. They did. All credit to Newcastle for learning the very vital lesson.
I mean, they learn from the lesson.
We have a great record of closing out games after riots, and
Well, 1990 you didn't, did you? 16th of May 1990. Oh, we got back on that day.
Are we in Paul Hardiman territory?
As you well know, he was suspended for that game. Ruben Agbula played.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we'd be wise to move on to the final.
Joking about crowd aside, the footage of the final, first like at St James's, it looks absolutely amazing. There's no advertising hoardings. It's just people. You can't. On that far side on what is now. And I've got this right with them. It was now the Milburn stand. I don't know if it was the Milburn stand at that point. The crowd just appear to be sort of right next to the touchline. There's no apparent fence. And there's 55, 60,000 there. The atmosphere looks incredible.
Yeah. And as with a lot of these games in the past, there's an official attendance, and then there's the real attendance, which maybe nobody knows, but it's certainly a proportion higher than the figures that are released. The cup fever took over the town. There were 35,000 tickets on sale to fans on the first day of tickets being released. They sold out straight away. The chairman said they could have sold 100,000. People were queuing up for 17 hours before the opening of the ticket office just to get them, and there was a real buzz about it. Newcastle had finished their league season by pretty much by this point, and so this took over everything, and yeah, people by this point were the fans were confident, but everyone was also a little bit wary, or most people were listening to some of the experts who'd come out and said, look, this Újpest team is the best team in Europe at this time. They queued up to say these things. Don Revie, Jock Steen, Bill Shankly all said words to this effect. And
well, they had been really, really good at Ellen Road, which I think is where obviously most British observers had seen them, and they were fantastic in that game in beating Leeds. So you can understand why, I mean, Revie particularly, but other people who'd seen them that night, their assessment was this is a great side.
Yeah, and it was this Újpest side. It should be clarified. Had the basis of the Hungarian national team. There were 9 of the national team were in there, and I think 11 of the actual normal squads in those days of the Hungary squad were Újpesti Dózsa players. It was something that was really hard to accept for the Ferencváros and Vasas players, actually, that that Újpest were now the dominant force, and that's part of the reason why it didn't quite work out for the national team at that in that period. But it was certainly the case that Newcastle could focus on this game entirely, whereas Újpest couldn't necessarily. They still had league fixtures to fulfill. And they also had national team call-ups. Hungary played Czechoslovakia, who in those days were an excellent team as well, 4 days before the final first leg. So they played Czechoslovakia at home in Hungary on the 25th with, I think it was 7 of the Újpest team in the starting lineup. And 4 days later, they needed to be in Newcastle. And
well, that's reflected in the scoreline, you would say. Especially in the second half, perhaps when they're tiring, Newcastle score 3 goals in 20 minutes, and it does feel a bit like a little bit of a blitz, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And again, you could say that this fixture schedule is just another moment of good fortune for Newcastle. They certainly earned their good fortune, and they certainly deserved all of the glory that they got here. But they took advantage of the situation. I think it's fair to say. Dave Smith was the coach of Newcastle United. So Joe Harvey was the manager, but day to day, Dave Smith was the man who worked with the players, and he was really important in this situation because, firstly, the team couldn't train on the St James's Park pitch before the first leg because of the weather, so they had to train in the car park outside. And what Dave Smith said to the players was, I've seen this team down at Leeds. They are going to try to pass you to death. They are going to play quick 1-2s, move the ball all the time. And the only way we can combat this is by sticking with the runners and not getting sucked into the ball. So they practiced day after day, hour after hour, day after day, sticking with runners and 1-2s and closing out the space. And this was exactly what Newcastle did in the first leg for the first hour. Újpest had a lot of the ball, understandably. They tried to pass through Newcastle, use their wingers, Sandor Zambo, and Laszlo Fazekas, but they couldn't get them into the game. Newcastle kept shutting them down all the time. Tommy Gibb and Benny Arentoft in midfield, like terriers around there. And, Frank Clark, who was a great defensive fullback, making sure that he and his defense, Bobby Moncur, Ollie Burton and David Craig followed the same mantra. You must stick with the runners, cut out the space. They did that. Újpest probably ran out of puff. It's fair to say.
And the pitch was really. I mean, you mentioned the weather. The pitch looks really heavy on the video of it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So that first goal. Sorry, go on, Matthew.
No, just a typical English pitch, isn't it? Certainly at the end of the season.
Over time, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So 63 minutes, a free kick. Wyn Davis takes it down. It looks certain to score. Really good save from St. Mihai, and it comes back to Bob Moncur, who'd never scored a competitive goal for Newcastle, and smashes it in. And then now, once he's worked out how to do it, he does it again 9 minutes later. And that's an incredible goal. He just picks up the ball in the centre circle, drives forward. There's this nice little 1-2 with Arentoft. And then he gets a little bit lucky with the break off a defender, but just keeps going. And the finish is really good. Yeah, that looks like a player who's used to making bursts into the box and finishing. Because he picks out the bottom corner from, 16 yards, something like that.
Yeah, he said to me, he just kept going. He wasn't getting challenged. He kept going forward. He was looking for something to do at that point, and it was kind of like Plan D. Okay, I'll better shoot now, and he did. I think some of the Hungarian players were, being a goalkeeper is a difficult art, right? And it's a lonely profession, let's say. I think St. Mihai got some stick for that goal and from his players.
He was not the player I'd have blamed for that, but okay, go on.
No, exactly. But I think that St. Mihai is a fantastic guy and was a very good goalkeeper, but he had a reputation for having a mistake in him in a big game. He 66 World Cup first game, played against Portugal, made a couple of errors, which he says were concussion induced from a warm-up accident. But then he was dropped after that, and he got blamed here. But I agree with you. I think it was just a great moment for Bobby Moncur, who, as you say, hadn't scored an official goal in the first team for Newcastle at that point, and afterwards it didn't really either. Certainly not in the league.
Well, he gets at least one more.
Well, he does. He does. He after this Fairs Cup season, but I think he scored against Forest in that riot, by the way, and I think against Inter Milan later on in a different competition in the Fairs Cup. But the point was, this is just a magic moment for him. They're 2-0 up at that point, and Újpest are flagging. A third is added by Jim Scott,
which is actually a really nice goal. Darton from the right, little 1-2 with Arentoft, and then a lovely little dinked finish. I see that kind of dinked finish. To me, that's a development that only really happens in the 80s when pitches get a bit easier and balls get a bit lighter. I think to dink a ball at that period was really hard. So I think that's a really great finish.
It was. I think it's probably no surprise that it was. It's a Scottish player who did it. I think Scottish players and strikers were always very creative in their finishing and clinical with it. The crucial point of this game is still to come, though. It's the last second of the game. There's a free kick given outside Newcastle United's penalty area. The wall is lined up. Shoimoshi, Erna Shoimoshi, whose nickname is Pixie, he's a centre back for Újpest. He was originally a midfielder, played for Hungary quite a number of times, was moved back into centre back as he sort of aged and maybe wasn't as effective for getting around the pitch. But he's well known for his blockbuster free kicks. You think Jörg Albert's type of player. And he strikes a magnificent free kick here, which nestles in the bottom corner of McFall's net. Turns to celebrate, and is dismayed to find, as the rest of his team was, that the referee claims he'd already blown his whistle for full time. And it's remarkable that can happen, that you would give a free kick, you'd line up the wall, and then you'd blow for full time before you give the player the chance to strike it. I mean, you think of 78 World Cup, Clive Thomas, and Sweden, Brazil, blowing before
the corners taken.
Yeah, exactly.
Scores, yeah.
And that means that Újpest go away with a 3-0 defeat, not a 3-1 and the away goal. and
which does make a huge difference.
yeah,
Yeah.
and especially
But
when
still, the second leg, Újpest start really well. I mean, they sort of battered Newcastle for the first half, really. And you can sort of see what a good passing team they are in that game. McFall makes a series of really good saves, and they get 2 before half time. So at that point, real panic beginning to set in. I imagine that Bene gets the first from narrow angle, and then the second goal is actually a really good goal. Dunai's pass to the outside of his right foot. Sinclair sort of gives it away really cheaply. That Dunai pass to the outside of his right foot, and Gurich just seems faster than anybody else on the pitch.
He just bursts through,
Pops it in the near post, and suddenly 2-0 just before half time. And there must have been real fear.
Well, apparently at half time, Joe Harvey said that, "Don't worry, lads, if we score, they'll crumble." No.
Well, and of course that is the away goal that Újpest don't have.
Yeah.
That if Newcastle get one, suddenly Újpest need 5.
I mean,
it's easier said than done, but he was right.
Yes, he was. I mean, you've summed it up there very well, Jonathan. The key moment of the half, though, it's almost like deja vu going back to the second half of the game in Newcastle, because possibly you could say the key moment comes in the last minute of the first half. A cross comes in, Willie McFall comes out to catch the ball, but Antal Dunai beats him to it, gets the header in. It's flying towards an empty net, looping towards an empty net, but it doesn't fall into the net for the equaliser. It bounces off the top of the bar and over. And if that goes in at 3-0 down, then you're in real trouble. You don't have the lead. What else does that give you in terms of negativity in the dressing room? And Newcastle had been, they'd gone out there. Obviously, that lead gives you a lot of confidence, but they knew that Újpest were at their most dangerous in their home. Joe Harvey was nervous on the plane going over. He said he just wanted it out of the way. He, nothing else would do now, but winning. Second was not an option, and actually on that day it was his birthday, and it was John McNamee's birthday as well, who was also in the squad, didn't start. So there was some nervousness, and the nervousness was exacerbated in the warm-up when the players went out for the warm-up. Bobby Moncur had won the coin toss in the dressing room before, and they went out, and it was, June in Budapest is hot. Okay. Yeah. It's not just hot as in, pleasant. It's hot as in sweaty, humid. It's not an ideal footballing experience for a bunch of Brits who don't ever experience this temperature, to be honest with you. So they go out, and within 5 minutes, they're back in the dressing room. They're sweating buckets. They can barely, take in enough breath. And then, Joe Harvey says, "What are you doing here?" We'll come back and it's too hot. And he goes, "Okay, well, I'll go and have a look at the opposition as they're warming up." Joe Harvey comes back in 5 minutes later and says, "Goodness me, guys, they're incredible, pinging the ball around, running around like terriers. They've got some pace as well. Good luck." And walks out. So the trepidation the Newcastle players must have felt, and then to see it happen in front of their eyes, and to get into halftime, you're right. Joe Harvey came back in, and it must have been the biggest moment of bravado in his life. And you will know, I think everyone knows that half of the genius of British managers at this time is their man management. The feeling they infuse in players, not necessarily tactical genius. He came in and said, "Lads, everyone's down, head in their hands. What are we going to do? Lads, don't worry. One goal, and this team will fold like a pack of cards, like a deck of cards." Okay. and then he walks out. And so, Bob Moncur had said, "Okay, thanks, boss, but we can't even get the ball. How are we going to score a goal?" Well, the way it happens is, so they go back out, and in the first minute of the second half, they get a moment of outrageous fortune. You know, that I've looked at the video in detail of this first goal, and Wyn Davies is harrying the central defender of Újpest in the corner, the deep in the left corner, Shoimoshi. The ball comes off Wyn Davies and goes out behind, but the referee sees it as coming off Shoimoshi and gives a corner. Shoimoshi's apoplectic. He's pointing, he's ready, but he's not switched on and not getting back in the box. So Újpest are kind of disorganized dealing with this corner. At the start of the second half, the ball comes in and it's sort of half cleared, comes back into the box, and there's Moncur. And that goal, the Újpest players said it was like a pinprick in a balloon. And
yeah, because suddenly they need to get 3 more, and then 4 minutes later there's another one, and it's again totally self-inflicted. It's Kaposta loses possession, Sinclair's cross, it's half cleared, comes out to Scott, his shot's blocked, and nobody picks up Arentov who volleys it into the top corner.
It's a fabulous strike from
so suddenly it's 2-2, and Újpest aren't just back where they started, they're facing 2 away goals as well. So they suddenly need to score 4.
Yeah.
And they don't get them. And then the coup de grace, 16 minutes to go. It's a beautifully British goal. McFall clearance. Wyn Davies flicks it on. Alan Foggan, who's come off the bench, runs on. He sort of tries one of those dinked finishes. St. Mihai gets a hand to it. It loops up, drops onto the bar, but Foggan's there to slam it in from 2 yards, which is one of those, when we've talked about this quite often on the podcast, those beautiful goals where for a good, I don't know, second and a half, but it feels like longer before the ball goes in, it's going in, so you can prepare for the celebration, and it's 3-2, the game and the tie is clearly over.
Yeah, and a famous win for Newcastle United, and still the last time they won a trophy.
Well, yes.
Go on, make your case for the Intertoto.
Dear me, no.
Seriously, the Intertoto is less than the Papa John's, but carry on.
Is it okay? I didn't realise I hadn't seen that memo on the rankings.
Don't get dragged in, Matthew. Don't get dragged in. What were you going to say?
No. What I was going to say was it's exactly right, and the pattern of those 2 games followed the same pattern. Újpest had played in the Republic of Ireland the previous 3 days before, in fact, really, away, and had come back to Budapest to try and prepare for these games. This was terrible planning by the Hungarian FA, and in general, Újpest had tried to get the game delayed without success. So Újpest, not just because of the away goal through Moncur just after half time, but also because of all that emotional energy and physical tiredness, having played so many significant games in the previous 2 or 3 weeks. They were gone mentally, and they couldn't get that back, and it was just a case of then playing out that last half an hour. They would say obviously they were trying, but the momentum wasn't there. Foggan, he was a young player who was as a British national sprint champion as a youth. So for him to latch onto a header by Wyn Davies on the halfway line is exactly the kind of goal he would or situation he'd love to have. You've got 40 meters to outsprint your one remaining defender, and there you are in front of goal. It's perfect for him, and it's the goal he's known by throughout his career, even though he did play for Man United later on and was a star player for Middlesbrough.
And played 6 games for Sunderland, let's not forget.
Yeah, well, so, you didn't mention that Bob Moncur even played for Sunderland.
Absolutely,
you can see the trajectory, Marcus, from
I was going to say...
Wilson, Ron Guthrie also played in the Fairs Cup campaign, ended up at Sunderland. There is...
Well, he did win a trophy, to be fair. Ron Guthrie was part of the FA Cup team in 73.
He was, so he's...
Scored against Luton in the quarterfinal. Anyway, carry on.
So, this was a seminal moment for Newcastle. It was arguably their greatest moment. Certainly, I don't know how you measure a Fairs Cup win against the likes of Feyenoord and Újpesti and Zaragoza, who were great teams at the time, against an FA Cup win. But an FA Cup win or 3 in the space of 5 years in the 50s, it's not easy to work out, but it's a trophy win which kind of, to me, signals the end of an era, the end of a naive era of football, which is based on fair play and just going out and doing things and playing whatever is put in front of you. And after that, I think it just felt like football became gradually more and more of a business, and the priorities of football changed. So to see it in its context, it's Newcastle's greatest moment, but it also, from that point onwards, Newcastle never really dealt with the modern era of football in the right way, and they never had a chairman, a manager, and a well-funded team all at the same time that could execute what they should have done. Because Newcastle at this point in '69, let's remember, I think it's only Aston Villa who have more trophies, major trophies, than Newcastle in English football. Potentially, I think Blackburn they had one less, but very soon Newcastle are overtaken, and it's never really the same again. You have these brief periods under Keegan and Bobby Robson, but you look back and you think it's an incredible achievement by Newcastle United, and they haven't returned to that yet.
Well, we'll leave it there then, Matthew. Thank you very much for coming on the pod and talking to us about this. It's been a pleasure. For more stories like that, do check out theblizzard.co.uk. So yes, thank you again, Matthew. A pleasure. Myself and Jonathan will be back next week with another great game from the history of football. We'll see you then. Cheers.